you have written a fantastic book. I've started to read it and finding it hard to put down. Um, let's begin. One of the things that I'm aware of, having written a few little odds and ends in my life, titles, early exits. Tell us about the title.
Oh, Peter, a title is so difficult to arrive at. And usually your first idea is not your best idea. I wanted to have a title that was accurate to the desire of people to leave this world early before their natural death. I wanted it to be intriguing. I wanted it to draw a person in to be curious about what do I mean early exits? And um, I had thought of very simple titles that blatantly say what the book is about. You know, the case against medical assistance in dying. Well, it's not, doesn't roll off the tongue very nicely and doesn't resonate in the heart very well. And I'm saying so much more than a case against medical assistance in dying. So, as is the creative process, this came to me when I wasn't thinking about it and when I was relaxed, and then it just rose within me and it felt right. uh, Especially with the subtitle, which is a mouthful: spirituality, mortality, and meaning in an age of medical assistance in dying. So, Peter, to be honest, one of the big issues with a title like this is how will it resonate throughout the world? Here in Canada, we know euthanasia is called medical assistance in dying, but in the United States, it's called physician assisted death. And in Europe, it's called euthanasia. So are people going to know that it's about, what it says it's about? I decided in the end that I am addressing first a Canadian audience. So I'm going to use the Canadian term, and I'm a Canadian. And those professionals in the field and those aware of the issues around this throughout the rest of the world, I'm trusting are going to recognize what medical assistance in dying means. And so the title came creatively, unexpectedly, spontaneously, after a bit of wrestling.
Okay, lovely. Well, you alluded to a question that I also wanted to explore. As an author, and this isn't your first book, one has in mind an audience. And it's almost impossible to write anything without sort of narrowing down the focus. And but I sense in the book you've tried to keep that pretty broad, but still, who's the audience? Like the Canadian people, of course. Okay, that's good. But who's the audience for the book?
Peter, thank you. And thank you, of course, for the conversation, for having me on for this. But thank you. You're the first person who's asked me about that besides my marketing consultant. Uh,
Okay.
that you've got to narrow your audience. Who is it specifically? And I frankly refuse to narrow the audience. I want this to be a book both for the general public, so it has to use terminology that's going to resonate well with someone who is not familiar with all the dynamics involved. And I'm not sure how I did that. I think I pushed the boundary on that. It's meant also, of course, for those considering MAiD and for their family members. And that doesn't need to be someone who has a terminal prognosis. I find these days with MAiD on the table that it comes up rather casually and frequently when talking about end of life plans. Or, hey, what do you think it's like to die? Or, gee, they hear about someone who's died and they say, well, I wouldn't go through all that. Thank goodness there's MAiD. So I wanted it to be for them. I wanted it to be for healthcare professionals uh, because it's very important that the book raise awareness amongst healthcare professionals about the psychospiritual dynamics of dying and why MAiD is an inappropriate intervention. I also provided different therapeutic counseling techniques, and that's for those healthcare professionals to consider. I'm trying to raise the cultural intelligence around those dynamics, around the inner deep dimensions of dying within a person's soul. Um, So, boy, it's a big audience. Nonetheless, I'm proud of the book, and I think that it did a good balance of meeting everyone's level of comprehension. That's why every chapter begins with a real story to touch the heart, and then a deep exploration of the dynamics to touch the mind, and then ends always with an exercise to employ some action and deeper awareness of what we're talking about. So, yeah, it's a wide audience.
Okay. Story is so important to the book. There are a lot of stories in the book. Of the stories in the book, which story or which of the stories blessed you?
Oh, it has to be my parents. Um, the story is bookended by my mother's diagnosis with dementia, and then at the end with her death. And my mom considered MAiD and actually was assessed for it. And while I was visiting her in the palliative care unit, she shared that with me. She said, I talked to the doctor about that thing you're writing about. I said, what thing is that, Mom? You know, where they put you down. Um, I talked with him about that, which brought up that's an invitation. Tell me more about why you're considering that. What scares you about dying? And she was able to share it plain and simple, echoing the words that hundreds of people have shared with me as they literally lie on their deathbed. I'm scared of the suffering ahead. They're talking about physical suffering. I'm scared about being a burden on my family. I'm scared about this dragging on much longer. And then fundamentally, I don't like this. I can't go back to who I was, but I don't like this. And I just want it. Basically, they say, I just want it managed and controlled by a professional.
Mhm.
I can deeply understand that. So my mom was basically saying that. She, because of her dementia, did not have competency and was declined. Um, and that gave us, her family, the opportunity to care for her at home as long as we could, and then to hand that over wisely to a fantastic nursing home. It was St. Martha's in Antigonish, and the care there was exceptional. But the length of time of her death was so protracted. It was through COVID as well. So that was so heartbreaking. Yet it deepened our humanity. It strengthened our love. It taught us things that we never would have grown from if she had had MAiD. So beginning and end of the book is my mom, and in the middle is my dad, who died of pancreatic cancer. And he also considered MAiD, and we had a good talk about that. And he said, well, I trust that you're going to manage this well and you can care for me. We're going to stay on top of any suffering. It's you promise. If I report the pain accurately, they can be managed. And indeed, that's the way it happened. Those stories stand out more than any other, and they form the walls and the architecture around which all the other material is built.
Mhm. Mhm. I want to pick up on something that you said during as you were talking about that, and you said, and that was an invitation, and that's a theme that I hear in the book, um, uh, an invitation. I almost maybe I'm putting something into this that's not there, but I almost feel like the book itself is an invitation.
Yes, it is. And it's an invitation to the hardest thing in life. I appreciate most people don't want to take up that invitation. They don't want to do this assignment, but it's inevitable. It's waiting for all of us. So here it is. I'm going to encapsulate it. And I have to reference Kathleen Dowling Singh, who was an amazing hospice worker and a superstar, a worthy successor to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And I have never read uh, any more accurate cartography of the psychospiritual dimensions of dying than in her book, The Grace in Dying. So I do say once you finish my book, pick up her book.
Hmm.
It goes much deeper.
Hmm.
So here's what she says and what I'm trying to expand upon. The dying process is astonishingly and exquisitely, uh, it flows in such a way that it calibrates our consciousness to the final stage of human development, which is transcendence. This requires the deconstruction of ego or your personal identity. And that happens in the reverse order that it formed. And this is classic, and it's been found to be universal in all cultures. So the deconstruction of your personal identity, what does that mean? And I'm giving you the synopsis of the book.
Hmm.
Um, it means I can no longer function in the world as I want. I can't go to work. I can't drive. I'm losing my independence. Then I can't change my clothes. I'm increasingly bedridden. I'm dependent upon others. So how you are, who you are in the world is dismantled. This is going to trigger ego defense mechanisms for self-preservation. We don't want to be dismantled, don't want to be deconstructed. We don't like this. And as we resist what is, as we resist that process, we increase our existential distress. And as we turn to it and allow it, allow increasing dependency on others, we experiencing increasing states of grace. This is how we become both broken and beautiful at the end of life. Now, I'm talking about transcendence literally as a mystical experience that is practically universal in the dying people, those who are dying. We move into technically a transpersonal state of consciousness. We move into a state in which we perceive our welcoming party. We are filled with peace, even joy and happiness. We have an equanimity that is not defined in any way by circumstances or accomplishments or appearance or possessions or status. There is an allowing that opens us to our fundamental nature, not the identity you have, not the thoughts and feelings and experience and perceptions and attachments and memories, not those. Those are not essential. What is essential is a state of pure awareness and being, not summed up in the scriptural passage, be still and know that I am God. And when you do that, when you are that, everything else falls away and it is sublime. So dying calibrates us for that final stage. I've witnessed it countless times in the dying because I worked for 25 years in palliative care. And nearing death awareness, I witnessed it. My parents both experienced it. And it's indescribable. We're talking here about a state of surrender that far surpasses any state of acceptance that the rational mind can comprehend. So this is a state of consciousness the ego is not capable of considering, of appreciating. So the heart leaps forward in the hope and trust and faith that it will be so. And it turns out it's practically universal.
Mm.
MAiD, of course, shuts you off before you reach that final stage of consciousness and development. And it becomes the ultimate act of ego self-preservation in the face of the process that naturally deconstructs it for transformation. Oh boy.
Mm. Mm. As you're sharing that, I'm aware of my own mother's death, and I was the only one with her when she died. Um, and whether I'm putting into that experience something that was there or wasn't there, I mean, that's up for discussion, I guess. But it was a really remarkable moment. I remember precisely the moment she died, and she had been unconscious in the last couple of days of her life. She had been in palliative care for a couple of months. It was quite a lengthy time of decline. Um, but at the very moment when she died, there was a really interesting thing that happened. She stopped breathing almost deliberately, I would say. And it was just, to me, it was so much like something that I had seen before, which was that it was the experience of someone on a shoreline, and their decision to decide to, no, I'm going to plunge into the water. It might be a bit on the cool side, but I'm going to plunge in. And it was just that feeling, that sense of that even though in a somewhat unconscious or basically an unconscious state, there was a sense that she had made a decision at that moment. I'm going to plunge in. I don't know. That's the way I experienced it. So, yeah,
I'm going to allow this.
yeah, yeah.
I was with one person who at 53 was dying of stomach cancer, and she said the most amazing thing. She says, I choose not to be angry. I choose to be curious.
Mm.
So that was amazing. And I've spoken with so many who share sort of a kind of a secret. They say, I'm actually okay with this. I don't want to share that with my family because I don't want it to seem like I'm good to leave them,
Right.
but I'm not resisting it.
Mm.
Now, of course, you and I and the book is exploring primarily a death by disease process. Right? We're not talking about sudden death.
Mhm.
We're talking about death under medical care. And those who are choosing MAiD have access to two doctors, at least to assess it. Um, they have access to the medical professionals. Uh, so they're not totally destitute. They are they're being well supported. In fact, it's very strange how rapidly a person can receive uh, the professional support and practice for medical assistance in dying, but how difficult it is often for them to get into palliative care.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is that at this point, I'm resisting the political side of things. A great deal of my work is involved in the political side of things, and it's a different kind of conversation. But I think that this is really an important side of it, and it's a voice into the conversation about um, medical assistance in dying, euthanasia. That is, I don't know that there is another book out there that addresses this from where you're coming from. Maybe there is, but I'm not aware of it.
No, there's not. I've done a lot of research. I can find none. Kathleen Singh's book, The Grace in Dying, does mention suicide, but it doesn't talk about physician-assisted death. Um, the the biggest issue with this is that the research is clear. The main reason people request it is not because of physical suffering, it's because of existential distress. And that is synonymous with spiritual distress, loss of meaning, purpose, identity, feeling a burden on others, all of those, and fear of the physical suffering that will be involved in a natural death. This means that a medical procedure is being used to treat a spiritual condition, but the culture doesn't recognize it as a spiritual condition. And even those who do don't realize the depth and nuances and the psychospiritual dynamics involved. I'm trying to raise awareness of all these things. The shock of this, and I see it on people's faces when I do presentations, is that death is never painful. Disease process is painful, and that can be appropriately managed by good medication, good palliative care. But death itself is surprisingly gentle. I encourage any of you listeners to go on YouTube and pull up Kathleen Mannix. Catherine Mannix. She's a palliative physician in the UK. And the talk is called "In My Humble Opinion," and she talks about what to expect with the natural dying process. It's not painful, but we imagine it is because we're so unfamiliar with it. No wonder people prefer, increasingly, over 50,000 Canadians at this point have chosen to have a professional handle it through an injection instead of open themselves to that natural process.
David, you invited a number of people to offer commentary on your book, and I'm just wondering, why did you choose the people you chose?
Well, I chose a lot more people, but it's hard to get people to read a 530-page book. People are very busy. I first wanted um, a theologian and ethicist from my own tradition. I'm a Lutheran pastor. And so I reached out to Professor David Primer, who is a brilliant mind and wrote an excellent paper on the art of dying well, medical assistance in dying, and a theological primer. And I really appreciated his wisdom as an ethicist and theologian. So I wanted him and others to read the book and check for bias because I'm too close to it. And he came back with a great affirmation of the originality of the insights in this that had not been considered in the theological debates or the political ones, not by the advocates, not by the adherents, not by the public, and not by the dying, and not by their families. No one seems to be aware of the psychospiritual dynamics that I'm speaking of, ego deconstruction, the functional role of suffering, and the nature of the existential distress. I wanted someone from the Buddhist tradition because they are experts in psychospiritual dynamics, especially those that play at the end of life. So Arne Schelling is a profound, wise teacher and translator of Dharma teachings. So it was great to get his input. I was most thrilled that Dr. Robert Twycross would not only give his opinion, but he wrote the foreword. And he is a rock star in palliative care who died, unfortunately, a couple of months ago, and based in the UK. I was so honored that he affirmed the value of this book. I have an endorsement by just an average person. That was really important. Dr. Janetta Tansey is with the Viktor Frankl Institute. That was very important because, of course, man's search for meaning. Dr. Theo Boer's endorsement. What an honor. He is the head of the Center for Bioethics in the Committee of Bioethics on the Council of European Churches. Dr. Bruce Grayson, an expert in near-death experience and near-death awareness. I wanted to cover all the facets, reflecting the directions that I've taken, both theological, cultural, anthropological, philosophical, so many approaches to address this issue. The book is much richer because of them.
I'm not watching the chat, and at the beginning we invited if people had any questions that they could ask questions. So I'm just going to take a quick look, see if anybody has thrown anything up. Actually, why don't I just open that up right now? And if there is anyone who would like to ask a question, you can do so by asking it verbally, or if you want to put it on the chat, that you're more comfortable with that, that would be fine as well. So
that'd be great. I want to highlight that I have been present for about a dozen MAiD procedures. And over my 25-year career, I've been with hundreds and hundreds at the moment of death and supported thousands as they walk the road. The Many of the MAiD procedures I've been present with were kind, were beautiful, were gentle, were what the patient wanted, but there was something missing. And I could not identify what that was. Since its introduction in 2016, it would come up just about every week at clinical rounds. And I became increasingly clogged with moral distress because I could not find the language to accurately articulate it. I had to wrestle with this material. It took 6 years to write the book. But now I have clarity, and clarity verified and embedded in the wisdom of thousands of years of people dying. The issue is not one of I'm compassionately saying it's not an issue of culpability. It's an issue of complete lack of awareness of these deeper dynamics that are at play in the dying process.
Very clearly.
So the question was, the Lutheran Church has embraced MAiD, and she's wondering what my insights on that are. And that's nationally. They have not only in Saskatchewan. So, and there's a theological doctrine or document out saying why they take a pastoral approach and a relational theology and feel we're called to support the person, whatever their choices, to the end. This is also why I wanted 2 Lutheran theologians, Dr. Firmer and Dr. Christine Lund, to assess my perspective, because I feel that was an uninformed or misinformed theological conclusion. And I address that in the book in a section that looks at the different religions and their perspective on MAiD. The theologians and council, the committee that devised or crafted the position, from what I can assess, were not familiar or aware of the functional process of ego deconstruction and our resistance to it as the nature of that existential distress, nor of the appropriate interventions to help process that existential distress, to calibrate one's consciousness to transcendence, to help with the hard task of surrender. I hope I'm not simplifying that, but I disagree with my own church's theological position. I've spoken with my bishop about that, and now some of the theologians who came up with that document are aware of the book. So Lutherans always identify themselves as a reform movement. So I'm just being a good Lutheran pastor and trying to continue the church's reform and development into a deeper wisdom. You're so right. Once a person has chosen MAiD, those in the medical clinical field with the patient now have an ethical boundary or obligation not to compromise their choice. It is unethical to dissuade them from it, and this is the position in medicine and psychospiritual care, right, and pastoral care. So that left me in an ethical quandary, which is why I decided that anyone who had undergone their first assessment, their 2 assessments, their first assessment for competency for MAiD, if they'd done that, I would no longer be involved in their case. I felt torn by that because I felt I was abandoning a person I had cared for and established a therapeutic relationship. But we have a moral obligation to protect our ethical integrity and boundaries, because if we don't, it's going to compromise our ability to provide care to everyone. And that was happening to me. So I checked with the ethicists and at the hospital and decided this was a healthy boundary. But then I only lasted for about 2 years, and then I had to retire because I could no longer function in the system. You're right. It needs to be brought up long before the person reaches even a palliative state. In fact, it should be part of the conversation in our culture for people who are young and healthy as well. How do we have wise conversations about the spiritual dimensions of dying and what that means? What is spiritual? So there's no clear, simple way other than to be aware of your personal boundaries and become skilled in raising or responding to the issue when it's there in the questions and the struggles that the patient has. So I did that always by early in the conversations asking, are you at peace? What scares you most? What can you do about that? MAiD comes up. And then it's appropriate to say, have you had a conversation about what it's like to die? Have you been given a roadmap by your medical team about what to expect, both psychologically, emotionally, and physically? Surprising number of them say, no, I don't have a roadmap. In which case I'll say, it's a really wise question. This is your ultimate journey. You should know what is to be expected because actually the course is very predictable. We know predominantly what it's going to be like and what can be done to calm the turbulence. Would it be okay if I invited your doctor to have that conversation with you or let them know that you're comfortable with it? Oh, yes, please. Now, that's the way the conversation goes often when the patient is alone. But if their husband or wife or family member are there, they're not too comfortable bringing it up. They often want to protect their family from that conversation. And that's good love. So I encourage them even then to say, hey, it's okay. Everyone's thinking about it. Do you guys all want to have the conversation? They're very grateful in the end for having all the cards on the table and the roadmap clearly laid out. That's the majority of the people I've supported. We have a population that has rejected the traditional spiritual language, religious models, because they don't seem to be translatable to their worldview, because they have judgments or preconceived ideas about what religion is for. And they feel that spirituality is either this kumbaya thing that doesn't have practical value or is just about being a kind person. That is an invitation to a deeper conversation. That's why in the book, I keep it predominantly in a secular terminology. Spirituality, and this is a new idea to many people. The function of spirituality is simply to know yourself as you truly are. Beneath anything that's temporary, what is the perennial truth about what you are? And that is not your role, your thoughts, your feelings, your body. It is what is at the ground of being. It is simple awareness. If God is real, what we call God must be, I assert, ridiculously easy to access and touch upon. And that can be done through direct awareness, simple presence. But this is an unfamiliar state in our culture. We are a distracted species. We believe everything we think, which is not wise. We tend to be controlled by what we feel. We're not familiar with silence and stillness and contemplation and presence and the texture of that quality of awareness. Because when you die, you drop everything that was impermanent and you awaken to what you actually are. When you understand what that is, you have a radical shift in your view of what reality is. So it's about waking up. I find the average person is actually quite curious about this. Modern spirituality is a lively conversation about the nature of consciousness. I think that is beautiful and accurate. And that's where the conversations really lead. In the end, I find there are no atheists. There are only people who have rejected the models that were inadequate to them.
One of the things that I noticed about the book that struck me in its sort of introductory pages, coming back to the idea of story again, is you open with the story of your mother's journey, but then the next person that you talk about is someone you identify as Shelley. And Shelley is a person who has struggled with some of the most difficult parts of life and things that can happen, addictions and street life and so forth. I found this to be a very interesting way to begin the conversation, moving from, if I hope I'm not insensitively stating this, but in many respects, your mom is a person who is classically like the individual who would pursue MAiD in our community, someone who's wealthy and has, in many respects, maybe a full life and has had access to many of the great things in life. But then you shift the conversation immediately to somebody who's has none of those experiences. Can you say a word or two about that?
Yes, Shelley's story, living on the streets, some prostitution, abandonment, addictions, tragedy, needed to be placed early in the book because of the profound beauty and wisdom I saw in her soul. And because here was an example of someone who wanted MAiD to escape not only a difficult death, because it's cancer, but she wanted to escape a difficult life. And that is increasingly the state in Canada. My mom wanted to escape solely a difficult death and a protracted illness, the burden upon others. Of all the patients, we're not supposed to have our favorites, but Shelley was one of my favorites. And her story encapsulated death anxiety, which was really what we're talking about here. She had requested and been approved for and was about to receive MAiD 5 times, and then declined it, refused, said, I changed my mind at the last moment. This was the only way she had ever been able to exercise control in her life. And it was how she negotiated with mortality. And that negotiation went on because she experienced compassion in the hospital, unlike any other time in life. So underneath it all was the spiritual theme of abandonment. Am I loved? Do I matter? When she experienced that love and that she did matter by asking her father, who she was estranged from, to come fly across the country and be with her, and he did, then her inherent dignity was restored. I talk about how she shared her story. So she gave me the gift of her broken heart. She placed it into my hands with trust. And then her father did the same, placing his broken story into her hands. And in our mutual brokenness and vulnerability, authenticity and community is built. And that is that was the treatment for the existential distress.
One other reference, and a surprising one, but one that hasn't come up in the many conversations that I've had around the advocacy work in terms of MAiD and so forth, but it did come up at a time sort of early on in the role that I have with the Catholic Association. And that was you captured by saying that I'm misquoting you. I'm sorry about that, but the gist of it is that in some cases the choice for MAiD is a way of turning the knife, and that sometimes MAiD is a way of uh, of expressing my anger to whomever or against whomever. And I have actually seen that take place where an individual chose MAiD, and uh, the what do we call it? The the capturing of her life in her what I'm struggling for the term, the proper term, but at any rate, when she wrote it herself. She wrote it her own obituary. That's what I'm looking for. Sorry. She wrote her own obituary, but it was very clear in her obituary that she was lashing out.
Yes.
And so that's a very small, I suspect, a very small sub theme. I've seen a couple of examples of it though, where that is either obviously the case or probably the case.
Right. And look at how that is an expression of such extreme and deep pain. Uh, so even the statement of it, you know, this is my revenge upon my family, or I know that this will make them feel horrible and I want that. Right? Those sort of questions are an invitation and a confession. Right? It's an invitation to be heard, to give the anger a voice, to process the rage. But who among us in our culture has someone who will sit and not abandon the person in that darkness, but will go deeply with it and help them process it? And it's tragic, especially since I say that relationships are the only clothing you wear to heaven. Do you want to take that with you? Um, Many people don't care about that. Their resentment or their sense of hopelessness and abandonment, their fear has swallowed them, and they need a guide to help walk them home. Because fundamentally, there is an inherent beauty within everyone. But we live in a culture where loneliness is epidemic, where suicide is the fourth or fifth highest cause of death in certain demographics. Our world is aching for some spiritual wisdom and communion.
In all of the encounters you've had, are there moments of humor that have come up, moments of laughter? I suspect there are.
Oh my, they're in the book. There's a few of them in the book. Yes. It's strange how dying brings a clarity to your life and helps you drop what is unnecessarily sapping you of energy. Priorities totally shift. And a person is able to have a sense of humor with themselves and with the whole funny, odd, and sometimes ridiculous or tragic journey. So yes, there's great humor. I've been with people. I can remember a mother sitting with her son and daughter. She was dying, and the room was beautiful, little lights and blankets and posters and colors. And you walked in and you felt it right away. And she was so weak she couldn't open her eyes. And I said, I'll call her Cheryl. I said, "Hello, Cheryl. I'm David." And she said, "Oh, I've heard about you. I want you to come and have a sit here. Hold my hand." Right? She her eyes were still closed, and she says, "Tell me, David, are you married?" Which just made me blush. And the kid said, "She's just being mom." You know, she said, You'll forgive an old woman, but I'm dying and I can say whatever I want. Right? There is a grace when you can laugh at what scares you, and even more when you can laugh at yourself. Um, there's a beauty in that that helps us relax, be with what is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yet, even for myself, I could not accurately address it because I did not have the terminology.
Mhm.
I felt it in my gut and in my soul. Um, but when I did find the terminology, I did not hesitate to bring it up in rounds. We would be discussing a MAiD case, and this is multidisciplinary rounds, and I would say, what is the assessment of the nature of the existential distress? How is that being treated? Um, these conversations would inevitably stretch rounds out beyond the hour that we had allocated. But it would be an opportunity for me to say, do you guys feel comfortable with me raising this with the doctor, with the patient? May I go ahead and explore this? Because I was always just careful about boundaries and ethics. And sure enough, to a fault, the nature of that distress was, I'm scared of the dying process, what it's going to feel like. And I don't want to put my family through this. And third after that, because they're close to death, is I don't like not being able to be who I am in the world. Right. So there's a whole lot of work that is aching to be processed there.
Mm-hmm.
But often I would only have a few days or a few hours in which to go there. And when you only have a few hours to do it, it's not appropriate. It's too late. It's a crushing feeling, but it's liberating to have the terminology now, to have written the book, to put it out there, to make this investment in our spiritual intelligence, and hopefully in palliative care.
Checking make sure I haven't missed anyone's questions as we're unfolding this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, by the way, for what you do in providing spiritual care.
So maybe as a last thought on what came across to me in the book, much of the conversation on the level of the conflict between those who support euthanasia and those who oppose it is framed in the context of autonomy. I hear you saying something else. I hear you saying that the real issue here is, and you use the terminology of the ego wants to be in control. And that's not really a discussion of autonomy. If I'm interested in autonomy, I'm interested, well, hopefully, I'm interested in your autonomy as the doctor and your autonomy to refuse to participate in this. I'm interested in religious communities' autonomy to determine that they are, they have different kinds of boundaries and they are not supportive of that and are not going to provide that kind of care. That would be a sort of a fuller understanding of autonomy. But if I'm interested in my ego and my ego gets what it wants, then I have a different there's a different substrata to this whole thing.
Yes.
So that's what I hear.
Thank you for bringing that up. Autonomy is an intoxicant in our Western culture. It is a maximal aspect of patient-centered care, but it's gone to the extreme. No patient can insist upon any particular medical treatment. That is always arrived at collaboratively, guided by the wisdom of the doctor. Yet people are insisting that MAiD is a human right, and the courts have agreed with that in Canada. But it's not. You cannot insist as a right on a particular way to die, just as you cannot insist as a right to be three-dimensional. You're going to die. What you're insisting on is that someone has an obligation to kill you. Now, I'm using the word kill, which is emotionally charged, but technically a neutral term. People are killed in many different ways. Cancer kills people. Car accidents kill people. Is it appropriate for people to kill people, for a doctor to kill you, to end your life before its natural closure? Also entwined with this is the word dignity. And that is a functional dignity everyone's talking about, a dignity of the ego's self-preservation. But you were completely dependent upon everyone to clean you and wipe you and move you and feed you and bathe you when you were a newborn. Did you not have infinite dignity then? Why is it any less true at the end of your life? Well, because now you've developed a personal identity that doesn't like that. Well, this is an example of ego defense mechanisms for self-preservation. And the more those kick in, the greater your existential distress will be. I am very frustrated by how the term dignity has been hijacked and twisted. The word autonomy has been simplified because nobody lives as who they are in isolation. We are who we are through relationship, through community. And your increasing dependency on others to care for you ennobles them. It awakens their deepest compassion. It deepens their humanity. It amplifies their love. It teaches them of their own mortality. It awakens them to their fundamental nature. It challenges them not to abandon any aspect of suffering. Can you be such a spiritual teacher even in your death as you lie unconscious in a bed? MAiD is efficient. MAiD is simple. MAiD is effective. But MAiD is inappropriate. It is an atomic explosion in our culture every time one MAiD case happens. I want to amplify that. When a tragic suicide happens, the explosion is terrifying and deeply impacts their circle of influence. But one MAiD case affects the entire country. So if I did not speak up on this, I will have become a casualty of the blasts and forgotten the inherent power we all have as we rest in love and wisdom to speak truth and to deepen our awareness of who and what we are, and that we can engage death as the ultimate moment of transformation that is astonishingly safe, as long as we make sure you're comfortable, and good palliative care will do that. What a challenging message. I don't expect that everyone will get it. I'm going to get a lot of heat and push back against this book, but that's just an invitation to deeper conversation, and I will do so as long as I have the energy.
Well, I am grateful to you for writing the book. I'm grateful for you to share with us today. This was a marvelous opportunity to explore the book itself, but also to explore more broadly all of our journey toward the fullness of life, and how does that journey unfold, and what tools do we need to make that journey? What skills? What what spiritual presence do we need in order to make that possible? So I have a message from Chris Taylor. So looking forward to reading your book and sharing it with others. So with that, for those who have joined us today, if you would put send me an email, anybody who would like a book, who would like a book, send me an email with a number in it between 1 and 100. The person closest to the number that I have here, I will buy the book for you. So do that, and we'll go from there. So David, thank you so much for joining us today, and many blessings.
Peter, thank you for a rich conversation. Thank you to everyone who's attending, and to those of you who will watch afterwards. May we all be wise. May we all die wise, and may that enable us to live wise, loving and compassionate. I really appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much.
Great. Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.